So, some of you may be under the impression that Donald Trump is definitely not a fascist, but have you considered he is? Alrighty guys, welcome to my channel. Hopefully you find something you like here, and if so, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the bell notification icon so that maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to actually know when new episodes come out. That said, I got a lot to talk about today, so we're going to skip the fan art section for now, but don't worry, we're going to have it in the next episode. Now, before anybody in the comment section starts typing away and telling me who gets to say who's a fascist, or any of your other Galaxy Brain comments like that, I want to point out that I'm going to be referring to the writings of both Umberto Eco and Lawrence W. Britt. You may have seen the 14 points of fascism that have been argued by Lawrence W. Britt before, as they've been shared in meme format on Facebook for years now. It should be noted when going over Lawrence W. Britt's writings, though, that he is not actually an authority on fascism. He simply has written on it. If I were to find someone who's a little more of an authority on fascism, we're going to be talking about our second source, which is Umberto Eco. He is a leading Italian academic who has written extensively on fascism, and the work of his we're going to be working with is called Fascism, whereas the work we're going to be working with from Lawrence W. Britt is called Fascism Anyone. Fascism was written in 1995, and Fascism Anyone was written in 2003. We're going to be weighing the writings of Umberto Eco a little more heavily than the writings of Lawrence W. Britt, seeing as Umberto Eco actually wrote an academic piece on this, whereas Lawrence W. Britt wrote more of an opinion piece on this. Starting with Britt before the more heavily weighted Umberto Eco, we have powerful and continuing nationalism. Now, this isn't just waving your flag out on your property and being super proud that you're an American and celebrating the 4th of July. Powerful continuing nationalism looks more like the further to show patriotic nationalism, both in part of the regime itself or the citizens that are caught up in his frenzy, and it's usually identified more easily by them having suspicion of foreign things outside of the country, potentially even invading them, which is basically what Donald Trump's platform on immigration has been since the beginning. Basically, please take a look at the Make America Great Again campaign and how it's proliferated and how it has been maintained to see what I mean. Next for Britt, we have the disdain for the importance of human rights. Considering that Trump has repeatedly said that he does not want American citizens to have single-payer healthcare or access to healthcare as a right, when America has actually signed the bill in the United Nations that says that healthcare is in fact a human right, and Donald Trump's Justice Department has actually been responsible for the attempt to remove employment discrimination protections from LGBTQ people. If you would like a full list of all the human rights violations that Donald Trump has engaged in, then please check the Trump Human Rights Tracker in the description. The next one is a pretty easy one: identification of enemies as a unifying cause. Two prominent examples that come to mind here, though I'm sure you can find more and let me know in the comment section below, but in the early stages of his campaign, Trump basically made the enemy of his platform Mexicans in the United States by arguing that everybody coming up from Mexico for the most part was either a rapist or somebody trying to take our job, regardless of the statistics that show that illegal immigrants actually commit fewer crimes in the United States and don't generally harm our economy in any significant way. He's also repeatedly tried to call COVID-19 the Chinese virus, basically lumping blame on everything that's happened with COVID-19 on China, even though a lot of that blame is to be put on his administration and honestly the individualistic nature of Americans. This constant scapegoating and shifting the blame of things that actually happen because of people like him or like him directly is one of the identifying traits that Britt tries to point out is pretty common for fascism. The next one is supremacy of the military and avid militarism, which I don't think I actually need to talk on very much because this is America and that's just kind of part of American culture. The fifth one is rampant sexism.
I did try and fuck her. She was married.
It's huge news there.
No, Nancy.
Yeah.
No, this was marriages, and I moved on her very heavily. In fact, I took her out furniture shopping. She wanted to get some furniture. I said, I'll show you where they have some nice furniture. I took her out furniture. I moved on her like a bitch, but I couldn't get there, and she was married. Then all of a sudden, I see her. She's now got the big phony tits and everything. She's totally changed her look.
She's your girl's hot as shit. In the purple.
Whoa!
Yes!
Whoa!
Yes, the Donald has scored!
Whoa!
Oh, my man! Wait, you gotta look at me when you get out of your
I better use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything.
Not news to anyone, but let's continue. The next one is a controlled mass media, and aside from the fact that Trump is willingly going to call any kind of news that is critical of him fake news, in March of 2020, as the United States was entering the earliest stages of the COVID-19 crisis, the Trump re-election campaign ended up sending a letter threatening TV stations if they continued to show a Priorities USA ad that was critical of Trump's early response to the pandemic, attempting to threaten them by saying that he would remove their licenses if they did not cease and desist. Now, technically, this can be seen as just bluster. Donald Trump threatens everybody, even if he doesn't have the power to do it, but I've repeatedly made the argument, and I will continue to make the argument, that it doesn't matter if you have a loaded gun. If you aim a gun at me, and you fire the gun, you pull the trigger, even if there is nothing in it, all that matters is that you had the intent to fire. Whether or not there was ammunition, it's the intent that matters. And remember, whether or not someone is a fascist has little to do with how successful they are. The next point is about national security, and all I have to do is say the wall, and you know what I mean. This next one is about religion and government being intertwined. This one's a little iffy. Trump doesn't actually seem to practice any religion, at least not in any way that we can openly identify outside of on top of camera. However, this point is more about regimes intertwining themselves with whatever predominant religion there is in the country, but a lot of countries seem to fall under this one, so I'm gonna give this one a yeah. The ninth point is about powers of corporations being protected. From removing climate change data from the EPA and openly trying to fight for tax cuts for corporations, Trump has done a lot in the United States to try to make sure that corporate America is more safe than, you know, standard American citizens. Point 10 goes in line with point 9, and it is that labor power is suppressed. The two types of power you can generally express in any country are power over people and numbers, or power in the monetary form. And seeing as most workers don't have monetary power, they only really have the option to fight back via numbers. So as a result, a lot of people end up seeing unions as one of the few ways in which labor can actually express their power. And Trump's administration has been fairly anti-union and has actually called union leaders mob bosses, so I'd say that this one actually works. When Britt was writing on this, the reason that he stated that labor power gets suppressed is because organizing the working class is one of the few ways you can actually challenge a state's power. I mean, look at how scared Trump is of riots. Next one is a disdain for intellectuals and the arts. Like number 8, number 11 here is a little harder to argue for, and in fact, I would say it probably doesn't even count against Trump in this case, though one thing he has done is attempted to defund the National Endowment for the Arts, and he's been trying to do that for about 4 years. This is one I wouldn't necessarily hang my hat on, so I'll go ahead and say that there are 9 points so far that Trump definitely ticks, and 2 that are meh to yeah. This next one is obsession with crime and punishment, which if you've spent any time on his Twitter seeing the constant calls for law and order and constantly being obsessed with whether or not he'll be able to lock certain people up in prison, then yeah, I'd say he actually checks this box pretty well. 13th point is rampant cronyism and corruption. Now, cronyism is the appointment of friends and associates to positions of authority, which is a thing I would argue that Trump has definitely done. Though, unfortunately for this one, this is something that a lot of presidents have done when creating their cabinets. The last point in Britt's list is fraudulent elections, which,
Win, lose, or draw in this election, will you commit here today for a peaceful transferal of power after the election? And there has been rioting in Louisville, there's been rioting in many cities across this country, red and your so-called red and blue states. Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
To see what happens, you know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and you'll have we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
Mr. President, the second question is, will you...
Please, go ahead.
Why won't
you asked the question.
Why won't you...
he won't guarantee a peaceful transfer of power, and he wants the ballots to be thrown out so that there can just be a continuation of his power. I don't know how much more blatant to make that one. Again, like I said with the gun, it doesn't matter if he has the ammunition, if he has the ability to actually ignore the election results. All that matters is that he wants to. That concludes the points from Lawrence W. Britt. We're now going to move into Umberto Eco's points. Just for recap, on Lawrence Britt's list, we found that Trump is at least guilty of 12 of the 14 points, but please do remember that Lawrence's list is the one we are not going to be weighting as much due to the fact that this isn't necessarily his field of expertise. Umberto's first point is about the cult of tradition, which is certainly something that America, especially American conservatism, seems to thrive on. And also, anybody that tries to argue that the Constitution isn't a living document is engaging in the appeal to antiquity fallacy and sitting in the middle of the cult of tradition. If you look at the concept behind Make America Great Again, this is basically all this is. It's a cult of tradition, looking back at when America was supposedly great at one point in time and trying to reclaim that lost heritage. And number 2 is the rejection of modernism. By modernism, Eco means the values of the Enlightenment or evidence-based rationality. Honestly, if you peruse Trump's Twitter account for more than a couple weeks, you're going to find that the denial of evidence-based rationality is painted everywhere, both in his ability to deny climate change and things like systemic racism. Number 3 is the cult of action for action's sake. This is one of the iffy ones. This basically argues whether or not the leader is impulsive, doing things not because someone has considered the actual long-form consequences and engaged in self-reflection over whether or not they should do an action, but merely because that action feels right at the time. While I do want to cite the general stupidity and the things that he says on Twitter without thinking about it, and the engagements with Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin as evidence in this fact, it's very hard for me to argue this one specifically because I'd have to argue intent, and I'd have to see how much self-reflection Donald Trump is actually engaged in. If you have a better example for this, let me know in the comment section below, but I think this one I'm going to go ahead and chalk up to as a meh. Number 4 is no analytical criticism, or the idea that disagreement is treason. And given the amount of times that Donald Trump has argued that loyalty is more important to him than actual facts, I'd say that he does tick this one. This can also be seen with how quick he was to dismiss Fox News as fake news the minute that Fox News stopped celebrating him earnestly. Basically, if you as a leader value loyalty more than evidence-based rationality, then chances are this category is for you. This next point is about a fear of differences, basically xenophobia or racism. And for this, we just have to argue, is Donald Trump a racist? Yes. In fact, he's got a pretty long history of racism from 1970 all the way up to 2020, from firing people off of his show because they were African American while too intelligent, his refusal in the 70s to actually allow black tenants to buy or rent any of his properties, arguing that the government was trying to force welfare recipients onto him as if all African Americans are welfare recipients. The 2015 arguments about Mexicans being rapists is another easy example. He's repeatedly attacked over Twitter and other means any NFL player who has kneeled at the national anthem in protest of racism. Despite the fact that kneeling has always been a sign of respect, it's just the fact that it was done about race and therefore makes him mad. And of course, his repeated attempts to say COVID-19 is the Chinese virus instead of just COVID-19 or coronavirus. Number 6 is an appeal to a frustrated middle class, and this is usually done by arguing that the frustrations of the middle class can be pinned on an enemy that is the lower classes. The reason that you're middle class and you can't actually get out of financial stagnation is because people who are undeserving of your riches are trying to claw their way up to you when they don't deserve the position, but you do. This is a thing Trump has done many times, and I will be pointing out an article from Harvard in the description that you can read to get some more information on how he has appealed to the working and middle classes here. Number 7 is an obsession with a plot. Basically, an obsession that there is some force that is plotting to destroy America or destroy you. And I don't need to point out the amount of propaganda that exists that has tried to argue that Trump is the one barrier between you and the people who are trying to get at you. A fascist will argue that there's a plot to destroy you, your country, or your way of living, and that they are one of, if not the only solution to solving that problem and preventing that plot from coming to fruition. Trump tries to pin this plot specifically on fake news or illegal immigrants, or in these recent cases, black people who are getting a little too out of line. Number 8 is anti-elitism. Now, this doesn't mean that they hate people who are in the elite. This means that people who might be in the elite or might be in the middle class or might be actually doing very well for themselves have to feel humiliated. They have to feel victimized. They have to feel like there is something going on. There is a plot, like I mentioned before, that is directly against them, and they are unsafe. Their way of living is unsafe. This also ends up working very well for them because when you make yourself out to be a victim in this way, you can argue that you're not possibly an elite, you're part of an oppressed class. This point, of course, goes hand in hand with point 7. you are oppressed. You are oppressed by people under you, strangely enough. And this usually ends up diverting attention away from people who might actually be oppressors, like, say, the people above you, hierarchically. Number 9 is that pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. And honestly, I think the fact that the United States has been in almost constant war for literal decades, and that Trump hasn't actually stopped that constant war, should probably be a pretty good indicator of how this one does in fact apply. Though in fact, many of you in the comments might be quick to point out that this isn't unique to Trump, and you're right, this is a very American problem. Number 10 is contempt for the weak, and this is basically trying to argue that instead of trying to take people who are weak, impoverished, disenfranchised, and trying to lift them up, it instead looks at them as people to be exploited and be trampled on. This is usually a very interesting point of ideology, because if it goes hand in hand with the anti-elitism from before, you have somebody who perpetually has to see themselves as a victim, but they have contempt for the people who are stronger than them in numbers by looking at them as individually weak. This also ends up tying very well into anti-union propaganda. But considering the way Trump has contempt for illegal immigrants who are usually very disenfranchised and trying to escape and get into a better form of life, or his contempt and his outright mockery of disabled journalists, it's very easy to find a plethora of examples for Trump's contempt for the weak. Number 11 is about the cult of heroism. Now, what does this mean? In Nazi Germany, the cult of heroism surrounded the mythological idea of the Übermensch. But here in America, this idea is centered around our military personnel, our police officers. We hero worship all the time, and Trump himself sees himself as a hero, and the entire MAGA fandom around him is essentially a cult of heroism around Trump. This is, again, like some of the other points on here, not unique to President Trump. This is a very American issue when it comes to how we celebrate our heroes. But this one does in fact apply to him as well as America in general. Number 12 is machismo, which is a combination of disdain for women and a condemnation of non-standard sexual habits, from chastity to homosexuality. This particular idea seems a little more in line with how we see Mike Pence and less how we see Donald Trump, but Mike Pence hasn't been completely disavowed by Donald Trump, nor would he be. He's his vice president, so this is one of the ones we'll have to put in the category. Unless, of course, you've got an example you want to give me in the comment section below. Number 13 is about selective populism, which is basically the idea that a majority in the United States or in any country is largely meaningless. All that matters is that the majority of your base is loud, exists, and are the ones being represented. An example of selective populism? Trump basically arguing in favor of the MAGA crowd and saying that everybody who is not his specific definition of an American patriot is against his MAGA crowd. When Umberto Eco actually wrote on this specifically, he mentioned that there's, in our future, a TV or internet populism in which emotional response of a selected group of citizens can be presented as accepted as the voice of the people, as opposed to the actual majority voice of the people, via anything like votes or otherwise. Wanting to dismiss election results in favor of his MAGA crowd, and of course the other things I mentioned here are things that you can put in this particular category. And as always, if you've got more examples, then please let me know in the comment section below. Number 14 is that Fascism speaks newspeak. Now, what is newspeak? This is basically a type of communication that tries to appeal only to the lowest common denominator, which is basically what Trump does at all times. People try to argue that this is Trump speaking like it is, or saying how things really are, but really this is just somebody who's very affluent in newspeak. This appealing to the lowest common denominator ends up working well in the favor of a fascist as well, because people who appeal to the lowest common denominator usually know that those are the people who are not going to research the things that they say, or look into the things that they do, or scrutinize their actions very well. That is Donald Trump's base in a nutshell. The amount of times I've had conversations with Trump-supporting MAGA hatters who haven't actually looked into Donald Trump, just celebrate the fact that he tells it like it is, probably speaks volumes, but that is an anecdote. If you've got other examples, comment section, as usual. Notice how in both the more academic and the more layman work, Trump hits almost every point, and the few points he doesn't hit expressly are points that he only kind of maybe misses. There's going to be a lot of source reading in the description below, so if you guys are into that, I hope you're ready for a lot. All in all, after doing these comparisons, I find it rather telling that Trump does hit most of these points on both lists very easily, both both in a more academic sense and in a more layman's just study of history sense. I will be linking both Fascism and Fascism Anyone in the description below for people who want to read. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of stuff down there for this video because there's a lot of claims made. This is the reason why I'm no longer calling Trump fascist adjacent on this channel. I'm just calling him a fascist. So long as he engages in these caustic behaviors, regardless of whether or not he's successful in attaining any amount of power or any amount of notoriety out of it, all that matters is that these are the things that he does. These are the things that he says, and these are the things that he engages in and with. You don't determine if someone has murderous intent by cracking open their skull and trying to figure out if the intent is really, really there. You figure that out through their actions and their words. It's the same way you identify a racist, and it's the same way you identify a fascist. Bear in mind also, places like Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany didn't necessarily hit every point on these lists either. They just happened to hit most of the points, and that is the point. Like I said, it's like identifying a racist. You don't have to be a member of the KKK to be a racist. That's just one of the qualifying factors. You're also a racist if you think miscegenation is wrong. I know this wasn't as elegant of a breakdown as something like, say, Innuendo Studios would have done, but I wanted to do this point by point, even if that ended up making the video drag on a little bit. I wanted to at least have this done so that when somebody asks, why do you think Trump is a fascist, I can then link this video to them instead of trying to figure out an argument on the spot every single time. If you found this video useful, give it a like. If you have any comments or any discussion you want to start as a result of this video, then please check the comment section below. Go ahead and let me know what you think there. I do read every comment, even if I don't necessarily respond to every one of them. But since we are here at the end of the video, I wanted to go ahead and take a moment to thank my patrons, and if you do like what I do, then maybe consider joining Patreon and becoming one. I'm not going to harp any more on this or any other point in this video for now, because honestly, this is a video I've done with the most outtakes of any video I have ever produced. So I honestly think I need to take a lozenge. I need to just rest my vocal cords and not actually speak for a little bit, because this is starting to actually hurt a lot. I don't understand how voice actors do this all the time. Then again, I do kind of do that on this channel, so I guess I do a little bit. Anyway, if you guys enjoyed, you know what to do. I hope this has been helpful in some way. As always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.